Hi everyone, my name is Christine and I'm going to talk about Spanish Baroque architecture and Spanish colonization of the Americas. The spread of Spanish architecture in America began after the colonization of the America by Spain. Before the arrival of the Spanish in America, Americans had their civilizations that were made up of their unique architectural traditions. After the contact with Spain, their traditions were mixed with that of Europe, and therefore much of the Spanish architecture spread mainly in America. The reason for Spain to extend its interest in colonizing America was because of having enjoyed many benefits that existed in the American colonies of Mexico and South America. The Spanish wanted to spread their Catholic religion and their economic dominance in America. The arrival of Juan Ponce de Leon in La Florida was the beginning of the colonization process. The explorers who later followed expected to find much wealth in America, which they could utilize well to their advantage. But war, slave raids, and foreign diseases that affected the local people coming their way. The beginning of the 16th century was an era when the Spanish colonizers in America were to fight other Europeans to have better control of America. The French became the first individuals to be expelled by Spanish in Jacksonville in Florida, having effectively used the military expeditions to conquer southern and western America. Missions became the best option and strategy to conquer the remaining regions. The Franciscan religious order missionaries settled in North America, ensuring the Spanish were protected during their exploration and colonization expeditions. Catholicism always approved of the Spanish conquest, since colonization always had some religious importance, therefore led to the establishment of many Spanish friars. Missions in New Mexico and in California. In the next slide, I will show you the missions of New Mexico and California. As the Spanish invasion was growing fast, conflict with England and France grew large, resulting in loss of lives, loss of time which could have been placed into other significant activities, and the destruction of essential resources. Religious and political differences in areas that Spain had conquered resulted in what came to be called Black Legend. Since many suffered under Spanish rule, since the Spanish were much invested in spreading Christianity, and their rule negatively affected people, the Spanish rivals who spread the paganism ideas, which offered some freedom to the people not present under the Spanish rules, were well accepted. Therefore, the settlement of Spain in America resulted in the emergence of specific architectural design for both houses and churches. Having settled mainly in Florida, the Spanish town was built according to the existing laws, which we are going to be talking about in the next slide. So the Spanish invasion, the Spanish Black Legend, since the Spanish were much invested in spreading Christianity, their rule negatively affected people. Spaniards feeding slain women and children to his dogs, Debray's works are characteristic of anti-Spanish propaganda, which was a result of 80 Years' War. Having settled mainly in Florida, the Spanish town was built according to the existing laws and was highly planned on a grid system. resulted in emergence of specific architectural design for both houses and churches. Florida grid system. According to the University of Florida Fernandina's Old Town Grid remains as one of the last and purest examples of the Law of Indies Planning Edict of 1573. Spanish architecture, therefore, can be divided into three main types. Firstly, there were the pueblos, which described the type of settlement that described the civic town. Secondly, there were the presidios, which referred to the settlement that described the military bastions. Third, the mission were the settlement that described the regional churches designed to promote Catholicism among the Native Americans. And finally, the churches built by the Spanish had the Baroque feature that originated from Europe. The feature was mainly represented in elaborated facades and round arches and domes. Bell towers were also famous, together with parapets that were curved and extended as far as the entryway. Spanish Baroque architecture. Baroque is a term used to define an irregular pearl that is oddly shaped according to the Spanish. However, all the other Europeans referred to Baroque as an unusual, irregular, and abnormal pearl. Two types of architecture were related to Baroque art, which was either the churches or the palaces. They include the cathedrals, monastic buildings, or even the parish churches. The architecture was characterized by town planning, a phenomenon in which cities were arranged to follow a predetermined scheme. Parks and gardens were also created around the residential areas and indicated some form of town planning. According to the architects involved, the Baroque was like a large sculpture. Since they believed it to be a single mass, they needed to be well shaped as required. Since Baroque architecture involved shaping a large sculpture, it rejected ground plans used in Renaissance architecture. The ground plans were therefore involving the complex and rich dynamic ground plans. The elaborated ground plans could also have been derived from the complicated version of geometrical figure. An example of complicated ground plans used to design buildings in relation to Baroque architecture was Francesco Borromini's design of a church shaped like a bee. This is an example of complicated ground plans used to design buildings in relation to Baroque architecture. It's a design from Francesco Borromini of a church shaped like a bee. He did this to honor the church's patron, whose family had a coat of arms that reflected bees. Others used ground plans of letters composed of great kings to build churches. The complex ground plans were one of the characteristics of Baroque architecture. The other feature was curving walls of many buildings of this kind of architecture. Baroque architecture, therefore, had its own origin when the Catholic Church established its appeal to express the Catholic faith through art and architecture. Complex architectural shapes became the primary representative of Baroque architecture. The architecture was characterized by grandeur and contrast. Curvaceousness was also the main feature of the architecture. Bright colors were also a main element of these architectural designs. The development of this style, therefore, had to go through three major phases. The three major phases. The first phase was the supreme order phase, whereby the Solomonic columns, a form of Guarini blend, spread. The second phase was the Churrigueresque column, also termed the estepes, represented in the shape of inverted corn, became established and represented a central element of ornamental decorations. Finally, the third phase was one that shifted concentration from the ornamentation and shifted the interest towards neoclassical sobriety. On the next slide, we will see the examples of the first phase, second, and the third. This is the Solomonic columns. The second phase is the Churrigueras column. The Estepit in the Basilica de la Vera Cruz in Caravaca de la Cruz region in Murcia, Spain, and the Estepits on the facade in the Parroquia Antigua in Salamanca, state of Guanajuato, Mexico. These are the examples of this is what a Churrigueras column looked like. Construction in Baroque architecture was not to be looked at as a combination of all aspects of a building. For instance, the facades, the internal walls, or even the dome were viewed separately. The Baroque architects viewed the facades as a section of a building that faced outwards. Therefore, the central part of the facades were organized to reflect what was found on the above and below side of it rather than on what was found on its side. This means that the facades were given more vertical emphasis rather than horizontal. The Baroque building is a complicated yet dynamic structure such that light became an important aspect that needed to be captured in the Baroque structure. The effect that light produced after hitting a particular section of a Baroque building was significant. Therefore, this need for lighting resulted in some specific decorations. These were all aimed at protecting a building's smooth surface. Thus, the small-scale decoration element of the Baroque building is what gave a building its movement effect. The Spanish Baroque ornamentation is believed to have come from the Moorish style used in the 12th century. When peace prevailed among the Muslims, Christians, and Jews in Spain, the Moorish style of decoration spread rapidly into synagogues, cathedrals, and even mosques. The influence of the style was so significant that even after its being viewed as outdated, it was still used in cathedrals. The Arabic design style was the most applicable in this architectural design. The Arabic geometrical style in tile and ornamental artwork was what was mainly applied in many architectural designs. The Spanish colonization of Native America brought about the intermingling of the different architectural designs with that of the Moorish architectural design. This intermingling resulted in the utilization of the American Baroque in Spanish churches, which were characterized by two towers standing on either side of the church entrance. In addition, colorful tiles were used together with gold to decorate the interiors of the building. Most elements of the Spanish colonial architecture that differentiated the Spanish-made buildings from the rest include the following. The buildings had thick and stucco walls painted in white. On the next slide, we're going to see the example that I put on my page. The buildings had thick and stucco walls painted in white. These kinds of walls were used because they could easily withstand a warm climate. This was believed so because the thick walls were designed so that they could have easily retained cold air during the day and at night when the temperatures were down. The warmth that was absorbed during the day could be released. In addition, stucco was used because it was available among Spanish settlers in America. Windows used for the buildings were very few and small. This was aimed so because a cool breeze could quickly enter the house, discouraging sunlight into buildings and preserving much warmth. The window pane used was the iron bars. The roof tiles were made up of red clay. The roofs were low pitch, in which some were entirely flat and some a little bit pitched. The Spanish interior walls and ceilings were supported using wooden beams. They were significant because they added warmth to the house. All of these styles you can see on all of the missions, most of the missions in California and New Mexico. The Spanish homes had to have courtyards. The courtyards were designed to settle in the middle of the home, where it would be more accessible for people to utilize both the inside and outside space for cooking. The Spanish appreciated this design because it made it easier to distribute heat around a home evenly. Decorations of buildings were not much observed among the Spanish, such that the exteriors of their buildings were white with limited decorations. I just wanted to incorporate that I remember our house in the Philippines. Um, there is a formal kitchen and a dirty kitchen. So when I was reading and doing my research, it has I thought about our dirty kitchen in the Philippines where we have it's kind of it's like an outdoor kitchen. Most of the Spanish Baroque architectural designs are still used to construct various buildings in the United States, such as in California and in Florida. This influence indicates that much influence of the Spanish architectural design on the American land they colonized. Most of the features are attractive and therefore they were kept. For instance, the white thick stucco walls. The modifications made to the Spanish Baroque buildings are using glass window panes instead of iron bars. The maintenance of buildings of Spanish Baroque architecture, though it seems complex, is not hard to accomplish the building's complete maintenance, provided the walls and the roofs are in good condition. Thank you for listening to my research about the Spanish colonial architecture and the Spanish Baroque architecture. Thank you.